locate yourself near a laptop. So if you go to YouTube and mute your laptop, and you'll be able to see his slides as he speaks. I know it's not ideal. I know you guys were going to multitask and work in Rhino, but now you're going to pay attention. All right, I see it popping up in a couple places. I pay the price for it later. All right, we got it. It's happening. We're nimble and we roll with these things, right? These guys are frantically working over there. We had the option of trying to pull everyone and bring you all up to Lear, but then we wouldn't be able to record the lecture. And so we opted for being able to record the lecture. And so if people aren't here, they can see it. If anyone is interested, they can go back and watch it later. So that's why we're going to try and do it this way. We're good? We're good. There's so many thumbs up right now. All right. Thank you for everyone's patience. Welcome to the College of Architecture and Design at Lawrence Technological University. Welcome to those joining online. Thank you, everyone, for being patient today. My name is Carl Dobman, and I'm the Dean of the College of Architecture and Design. We talk about design, technology, and practice, and we believe that the future of design is multidisciplinary and technological. Given this belief, we offer a range of design degrees: graphic design, product design, game design, interiors, and architecture. We track design trends, emerging technologies, and advancements in practice as a means of crafting educational approaches to these areas, and so that our students are in the know as it relates to them. Our design technology lecture series allows us to engage in design discussions and offer broad perspectives on where we're collectively and professionally heading. To view the past lectures, go to the YouTube channel, and you can find links on our social media and on our website. I'm really excited to be able to introduce Julian Bleecker, who's joining us today. Julian Bleecker is a researcher, designer, entrepreneur. He founded the Near Future Laboratory. You didn't wear your jacket today, but he's got great merch that you guys should check out, Near Future Laboratory. Amazing website, blog, a podcast now, and franchising in multiple locations, probably. Julian's educated as an electrical engineer. He's worked for Nokia and even, looking through your CV, MTV at one point in time.
That's right. Back when that was a thing.
Do you guys know what MTV is? Is that still a thing? It's still a thing. So he's educated as an electrical engineer, but he's here to talk to us about design. And these are the kind of opportunities at a place like LTU where we can find amazing crossover. Julian's got a PhD from the University of California, Santa Cruz in history and philosophy, with a concentration in futures, technology, design, culture, and society. You said you didn't have a slide for this, but I saw Julian lecture in the past, and he was very proud to display his diploma, which at the time the governor of California, because so much of what Julian does is in science fiction and all of these things, his diploma is signed by Arnold Schwarzenegger. How cool is that?
Yeah, and there was a chapter on Terminator in it, so it's kind of perfect.
He was writing about the Terminator, and the Terminator signed his diploma. So it doesn't get cooler than that. Julian initiated the concept of design fiction. I know we have a number of students in the room today from our multidisciplinary design studio, and I know that you've been talking about design fiction. He co-authored the book, The Manual of Design Fiction, and the forthcoming book, The Reader's Guide to the Manual of Design Fiction. He's also founded Amida. I had to do that in my head. It rhymes with speedometer, as I'm told, which is a company that designs and manufactures high-precision cycling computers. Julian is perhaps well known for his work as the originator of the concept of design fiction, a term that he coined to describe the use of speculative design as a means of exploring and shaping the future, which is so much of what we do within the college. He's written extensively on the subject and has published a book on the topic, The Manual of Design Fiction. Throughout his career, he's been recognized for innovation, influential work, and has received numerous awards and accolades. He continues to be an influential voice in the field of design, technology, and innovation. He's also super funny, he's a nice guy, and he's a troublemaker. So it's gonna be a lot of fun to have him here. So please help me welcome Julian Bleecker.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Carl. I reserved my troublemaking because I actually have a picture of the back. Both a little bit more gray 16 years ago. So I want to start by reflecting on the state of creative practice at this particular point in time. And it's heartening to hear that there's an aspect of the program here that involves multiple disciplines and allows for that kind of crosstalk across disciplines. And what I sense into, not knowing the details, but what I sense into that is that we're going to need that kind of creative consciousness quite a bit in the coming decades. The challenge that we face as creatives is the ability to manage and contend and work constructively with what I refer to as structure. And my kind of statement around this is that there's this fundamental predicament that as creatives we face is that we have to contend with structure. Now, what do I mean by structure? Well, structure in my mind is that thing, that sense, that feeling that you get when you have an idea and at some point that idea bumps up against something where you start to wonder in your head, man, I just wish I could just do this. I wish I could just go to my studio and somehow try to find a way to translate this idea into the form that I'm feeling somewhere. It's that moment when you're sitting in the shower or wherever your ideas come from, you're on the sofa, you're talking with friends, and your mind is expansive. It feels like it's generative. Things are going someplace. And at some point you're like, well, if I want to do this, probably going to have to go talk to someone to get some resources. Maybe I'll apply for a grant. As soon as you start doing that, all of a sudden you think like, okay, what's that form look like for the grant? Now they're asking me to explain the project.
I can hold this for you like this.
Yeah.
If you want, but apparently this isn't working.
Okay, perfect, awesome. All right, I'll start over. No. So you're familiar with that feeling, right? And it's probably the same feeling you felt. It's like, I want to go to design school. And someone's like, okay, that's cool. So you got to pick one to go to. And you start picking the one to go to, and you sort of look at the campus picture. It looks kind of cool. And then there's the application form, and then the conversations with financial aid, and all those moments where all of a sudden your creative consciousness, your ambition, your desire, the thing that you want to realize starts hitting up against a wall. And you're trying to find the way to contend with that wall. You're trying to find the way to essentially go to the mats with it. How can you let me get through this moment where I'm dealing with this predicament, where I'm dealing with structure, just to get to the other side so I can actually do the thing that I'm feeling like I want to do? And how do I respond to all the circulation of conversations that happen around that idea, the things that are pushing you one way or the other? And when I sort of felt into this idea that there's this predicament that we always have to deal with, I started thinking about what is the nature of that predicament? What are the ways in which we can understand it more completely and more fully so that we can then really kind of not just go to the mats with it, not get into a fight with structure, but actually collaborate with structure. So this in my mind is kind of like structure. Right? This is the moment when you're sort of dealing with those authorities, those institutions, those frameworks that are asking you to essentially justify your creative consciousness, And you have to deal with it because structure is going to write a check, or structure is going to give you access to certain facilities. There are going to be rules around that. They're going to say you have to do it this way, it's due by this time, all those things that kind of put a container around that feeling that you have that you just want to get through. But then it occurred to me, like when imagination and structure are in rich collaboration, like beautiful things happen. Like I used to feel like structure was the thing that's just preventing me from doing what I want to do. It's the thing that I need to learn to kind of figure out how to do a little jujitsu move. I need to figure out the way to get structure to play by my rules. And when I thought about and reflected on the ways in which the human imagination has done exceptional things, it occurred to me like that's a moment when structure and imagination are in this rich, meaningful collaboration. And this image sort of stands for me as that. It's something that I sort of feel a little bit of nostalgia for. Like when I was like 8 years old, I wanted to be an astronaut. And it's sort of a reflection on the fact that you had like, I don't know, sometimes I hear the numbers like 500,000 people coming together to basically hand build one spaceship so that Ed White could do this. And so that we could all observe this achievement of humanity. When I was that 8-year-old kid who wanted to be an astronaut, I think this show was a lot of the reasons why. This show is like, so pre-internet. And it was something that came over the air, right? And it was like Thursday at 6 p.m. Had to adjust the antenna on the house to kind of get it to pull in the Philadelphia station. Sometimes I'd go over to my friend's house. He lived across the street. His house was just a little bit higher, so it came in a little bit better. And I knew and somehow enjoyed the campy melodrama of the show. The writing isn't exceptional, but it had meaning. It's something that touched me in a way where when I watched it, I was like, whoa, this is cool. There's something going on here. And I didn't have the language. I didn't really have the facility to understand in any kind of critical way why I was feeling what I was feeling, but I just felt it. And there was something even further about like the kit, like all the equipment that they had, like the communicator. I knew what it did, but at some level it's like there was something else magical going on. It wasn't just a prop. It somehow represented some aspect of this world that, again, like as a young kid, I somehow just felt like nothing more than, whoa, that's cool. That's about as extensive as my understanding of it got. And it's a thing that would draw me back to the show. Like, when's it on? I'll see it again. What's going to happen this week? And so this object stood for me as this totem of a sense of possibility, something that at some level, that whoa, cool feeling that I had, that kind of nudge in my kind of burgeoning creative consciousness was telling me that thing, whatever that represents, whatever that means, whatever that feeling is that you have, that's what you want in your life. You want to chase that feeling for the rest of your life. You got to figure out the way that you can find something that you do in life that gives you that feeling back. You want to be involved. You want to be engaged in it. And around that time, my dad said, super into the show. Okay, you know what? There's a Star Trek convention happening in New York. We're all going to go to the Star Trek convention. And this was a moment when the idea of like fan conventions was just kind of at the edge of what people did. And so it's kind of a big deal. Like we're going to all traipse into the city. We're going to see what happens at this show. We're going to sort of luxuriate around with other people who are into the show. And I don't know, I guess we'll see what happens. Could be fun. And so, you go to these shows and you're in the auditorium and you're seeing like, wow, man, there's the actor I remember seeing. And you hear people asking questions and they're talking about the show. And you can sort of, wave to them and they wave back. And it was just that other level of like, whoa, this is cool. Like, check this out. Like, I'm now more deeply involved in this wonderful, campy, weird, science fictional universe by association, by affiliating myself, by showing up at this show. And when you're at these kinds of shows, there's like the kind of trade show area where people are selling stuff and they've got their kind of slightly sad folding tables with the bunting around it, and they're kind of sitting in a chair, and they're sort of like they've got maybe a bunch of signed photos, maybe they have some fan art, and you're just kind of like looking around, it's like, wow, there are more people who are into this. Look at what they've done. They've created these things. And I came across one of those sad folding tables, and the guy had on the table this book. And I wondered what it was, so I opened it up, and I saw this page. And this book was a Star Trek Starfleet technical manual. Like, wait, what? What are you talking about? Technical manual, I don't get it. And on one page, they had this schematic, an engineering schematic of that communicator. That same thing that I was like, whoa, that's cool, like this thing is great. But I knew it was a prop. I wasn't naive enough to assume that it was a thing that really existed. I knew that this is a show, it's called Star Trek, there's a production team, their camera is operating, someone yells action and then yells cut, and when he yells cut, the actors say like, hey, could you bring me another coffee? I got that it was a produced thing. And I got that there was a moment in which it existed and then it stopped existing. But now here I am at this trade show in New York City, and I'm looking at a book through which that world is kind of leaked into. And at this point in my life, had been doing a little bit of like electronics circuits, little kits and stuff like that, nothing super fancy. So when I saw this, it had this level of legibility. Like I saw it and I kind of knew, I recognized it. Wait, this looks like a real thing. Look, there's a schematic indication of a speaker. And there's this particular transistor circuit. I was just working on that a few weeks ago. Like, what is going on here? What's happened to this world? It's as if someone went to the future, found this manual and brought it back and was like, hey, here, kid, if you want a communicator, here's the instructions on how to build it. And I was just enthralled by the prospect that there was this other element of that world. And it was represented not as a show, which I knew that someone sat down, they wrote, screen producers, all that kind of stuff, people yelling at each other, lighting equipment, but at this other level, as if that world existed in this other plane. And I imagine what kind of, well, first of all, I imagine it's like, who would make this thing? I mean, what's the point, right? It's a fictional show. I can get it if someone says like, hey, I want you to write an episode of Star Trek. Be like, amazing, that's awesome. How much does it pay? You get $1,200. Okay, cool, I'll do that. Can I come on set and meet some of the actors? I don't know, maybe. You know, I get that world. I understand that. And I understand that there's that value exchange network where someone's like, okay, cool, I'll do the show. You'll pay me a bunch of money, right? I'm dealing with structure here. And in exchange for that, I'll give you a script and I'll give you 4 revisions. Cool, got it. That's the arrangement. But now here's someone who's created something from this world that wasn't commissioned by the show. There wasn't a producer who said like, hey, could you make us a technical manual because we need it as a prop in one of the episodes? Someone did this completely independently. And what kind of people do these kinds of things? Well, this looks legit. This looks like someone from the world of structure was asked, hey, we need a schematic for a communicator, and we need instructions on how to repair it. We need a parts list, right? That sounds like something that when I was an electrical engineer, I would be asked to do. Someone gives you a job, they say, design this circuit and create a schematic of it in this particular form, and we'll share it for review, and we'll go through a bunch of design cycles, and then we'll do prototypes, then we'll do mass manufacturing, and that's what your job is. That's the structure that you live in. So when you look at something like this, I imagine like this is the kind of place where things like this get made. Right? Remember, this is kind of like the mid to late 60s. Bunch of people organized in these rows, each with a drafting table, taking on their part of responsibility of translating someone's idea, let's say they're making an aircraft wing, someone's idea into a material form. And how do you do that? You do that with structure. You get a bunch of people together, you say, this is what we're going to do, we're going to make this aircraft wing, and I want you to do the far end of the wing, you do the electrical system, you're going to do the fuel system, okay, get to work. They sit around in places like this. Well, it turns out that the person who wrote this was one of those kinds of people. His name is Franz Joseph. Franz Joseph was an aerospace draftsman, sort of worked at a company called General Dynamics, and his job was, presumably, at that time, to do drafting of aerospace components. So he was one of those people sitting at that table. And that's what he did day in and day out. Let's assume like 8 to 5 every day. So it makes me wonder, like, what kind of person would actually spend that time in their free time to do the exact same thing that they had been doing all week long? It'd be like saying, hey, you're a truck driver. Hey, this weekend, can you also drive a truck? And I wonder what goes on. Like, how does someone get to that point where they're like, I'm going to spend my free time doing the exact same thing that I do at my job and do it for free and do it with no hope or ambition that it'll be much more than an exercise? Like, where does that come from? And for me, it's that feeling, like that itch that he had to scratch, where he wanted to translate his own feelings about this Star Trek universe into a form using the resources and tools and skills and knowledge and expertise that he had. I mean, how else could he have done it? If someone said like, hey, Franz, I don't know, you're doing this schematic thing, doesn't make sense. Doesn't it make more sense to like actually write a spec script for the show? And he may be like, I don't know how to do that. I don't even know where to start. Like, what do? You need a typewriter? Like, okay, so but then I got to come up with a story idea. It's like, no, you know what? I know how to translate my ideas about this world and my imaginary of this world into a form that is completely unexpected. It's not a screenplay. It's actually a schematic of components from that world. And people might look at it, it's like, that's the silliest thing ever. That doesn't make any sense to me. Where does that actually live? There's no precedent for that. Who's going to care about that? Well, he did it anyway. And not only did he do the schematics you'd expect, like the engineering kind of stuff, but essentially he created a brand book for the show. These are elements from the show that just, they don't even exist in the show itself, right? A color diagram, font specifications, clear space definitions, like what the heck's going on here? Like where did his imagination go? It just got enthralled with the idea of constructing this kind of side story to the whole show, imagining that, well, if there's a Star Trek universe and there's a Starfleet and there's spaceships, I mean, like someone's on sub-basement L who's got to repair this stuff. How do they repair it? Well, they must be a technical manual someplace. Let me make that. Let me contribute to this universe of the show with this. I mean, this kind of stuff, this is just bonkers. So here he is sitting, it's like actually doing like these kind of pattern diagrams, cut and sew stuff for the uniforms. I mean, I'd wonder if even the props department had this. Look, that's where I always wondered, like, where does the phaser and communicator go? Their descriptions about how they adhere to the materials. So when he did this, unexpectedly, I would reckon from him, it became like this bestseller. So it's kind of a big deal. Like this isn't just, we can't just dismiss this as like fan art or something that we found and some guy happened to work on it and we found it in his attic, like, oh, isn't this cool? Like this thing sold. And there's actually one of these technical manuals for all of the Star Trek franchises. 46 years later, they're still selling it. I don't think there are very many authors who can claim that. So something is going on here. And that's what I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand how can a creative consciousness find its way to touch people to such a degree that they're enthralled with the vision and that it exists in this way that pulls people into the story in this rich way, that really activates their imagination. And I wanted to understand enough because I thought, like, if we can understand that, if we can describe that, if we can discuss it, if we can teach that, then we have a really powerful tool for translating our imagination into forms that actually enroll people into the visions that we have. And it occurred to me, like, Franz Joseph is kind of like an archaeologist. You know, archaeologists, they dig through the earth. They're looking for elements that represent possible past worlds, right? They're doing this in this way that I can only imagine is like a forensic detective who's not allowed to talk to any perps. Like, I can't talk to anyone. I can only look at what I've found in this room, and then I have to try to interpret what had happened. And of course, there's no one left in these extant worlds to actually have a conversation with. Like, what did you use this for? It just doesn't happen. The best you can do is this. Kind of squint and ponder and try to feel into what this particular artifact might have been. And this might be as much as you get, just a fragment of something. Was this a bone? Was this a piece of pottery? If it was pottery, what did it hold? If there's symbology on it, what did that symbology represent? Is this a totem for a god? If it is a god, what was the nature of your religion? What was the arrangement of your kind of social formations? All these kinds of things can only be interpreted and assumed. And effectively, they're going to interpret the meaning of this thing as through a story of some sort. They're going to try to translate based on their insight and expertise and knowledge about what this thing represents. And so the past is this thing in these elements that in this object, it contains the fears, hopes, dreams, desires, ambitions, the nature of a society, its politics, all in this physical thing, this physical object. And in this context, I like to think of objects as doing something similar from the future. They can represent and imply what a world was like. So that communicator and the schematic, it's telling this rich story about that world. I mean, a schematic by itself, sort of you assume like, oh, this is something that's actually manufactured. Like, how was it manufactured? Who did it? Oh, it's probably something they need this because they need to repair it. Okay, so this is a world in which things have to be repaired. Wait, it's a communicator. So this is a world in which people discuss across long distance. They have conversations. And the same thing with all the other objects. And so the artifact itself, the material object, tells a story. And if you put it out there in the world, it's left there for someone to interpret, very much like the archaeologist. And so in my mind, Franz Joseph was doing that. He was like an archaeologist, only instead of digging into the past, he was digging into the future. And rather than telling these full, complete stories about the world, he was creating implications of the world. All those objects become symptoms of a world that doesn't yet exist. And he wants you to sort of join in and sort of feel into this world in a way that isn't as didactic as a show where they're sort of telling you this is what we're going to do and this is the mission and here we're going to go and this is what happened to so-and-so. It's all implied as if you went to the Star Trek universe and there was no one there to tell you a story. You only had to reconstruct it based on the things that you see. And so that's what design fiction is. It's the creation of tangible prototypes of the material cultural artifacts of possible near futures. It's that inverse of what archaeology does. And it's the kind of thing that the creative consciousness, in my mind, really can sort of fill into. It's the kind of thing that you can look at the world that your imagination is constructing and bring that to structure. Put it in a form that becomes legible to structure, that structure can understand. And in the context of what Franz Joseph was doing, the idea of a technical manual, that's like eminently a structural thing, right? Technical manuals exist for structure. They exist so you can have systems that are organized well, that have systems of repair and of sharing, and you can do that in a way that is representative of the potential of that world. So let me give you some examples, aside from the Franz Joseph. So let's say you're doing kind of futures work or you're trying to feel into a world, and someone gives you the brief and they say, could you tell me about the future of breakfast? I want to know something about that. And so the usual approach would be to sort of look around, like do some Googling, look at reports, try to find some information about where trends are going with breakfast. What does it look like? And so you get a bunch of material. You get some articles, you get some reports, you download some graphs, you maybe do some interviews with people, and you gather all this information. And then you take all that information and you essentially synthesize it into another report. So now there's another report on all the other reports that's synthesis of all those other materials. And maybe it's got a top sheet, and the top sheet says, here's where we think the future of breakfast is going. Here are some trend lines and graphs that show the direction of the economic aspects of it or supply chain availability. And so essentially, you've done all this work creating another artifact that is eminently legible to structure, right? Because structure gets reports. Like, cool, you got a report, 3-ring binder, I appreciate that. Could you also send me the PDF? And I need a PowerPoint, I need to send it to the rest of the team. And all of a sudden, you're bringing your imagination, your ideas about what the future of breakfast might be like to structure in this form that is expected by structure. Report, PDF, PowerPoint, whatever it might be. But suppose you sort of wondered, like, when I started thinking about the future of breakfast, for some reason, can't really explain it why, and maybe I would be too embarrassed to mention this to the team up on the 6th floor that is structure. That actually I was imagining a cereal box. When you guys said future of breakfast, the first thing that popped in my head was cereal box. And so you decide, like, you know what, I'm going to take a chance and I'm going to present to them the future of breakfast in the form of a cereal box. And you sort of think about it, it's like, I'm probably going to get fired, but I'm just feeling that that is a really interesting, compelling, evocative, vivid way of presenting the future of breakfast. And so you took all that material that you gathered, and instead of translating it into another report, or that PowerPoint, or that PDF, you translated it into a representation as if this box of cereal existed, as if you got into the janky time machine that's behind your studio, and when you walk into it, it smells like sweat and machine oil. There's a big red button. The button says, do not press ever. There's another button that says, got a little repair tag on it. It says, Edgar, please repair as soon as possible. This hasn't been working for the last 3 weeks. And it's got a dial that's got a date on it, but the dial's kind of like broken. It just sort of spins free, like it's not attached to anything. You're kind of like, geez, I don't know. All right, so let me go to the future. Let me go to the breakfast future. And you get in there, you push the button that says do not push, and the machine shakes and rattles, and then you sort of stop someplace, you get out, and you're in someone's breakfast nook, and you kind of look around, the machine's kind of beeping. You're like, shit, I think that thing's going to go back any minute. Let me just grab a few things. And you grab a box of cereal that happened to be on the breakfast nook. And when you got back, you sort of got back, it's like, I wonder where I went. And you look at it, and it's like, hey, something's different here. This looks like a box of cereal, but it's a little bit different. And actually, it's the synthesis of all that research. So maybe some of that research said that insect protein, right, is going to be a source of protein in the future. And now you could say that back to structure. You could say, insect protein's on the rise. Here's the graph. It's going up to the right. You guys need to pay attention to that. Or you could bring them a box of cereal, plunk it down on the table, have them look at you and say, they mutter to each other, right? I don't know about this guy. What's this, a box of cereal? We already had breakfast. No, look at it. And they sort of take it reluctantly because they're expecting the PowerPoint PDF or 3-ring binder, and they start looking at the box of cereal. And they're like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay, I see what you're doing. You've represented this in the form of a package of cereal that might have been from the future. How'd you get this? He said, I got this janky time machine in the back of my studio. It's got a big red button. It says, do not press ever, another one that's got a repair tag on it. I went to the future. Come on. Well, whatever. This is great. You really brought your imagination right to me. I mean, it's sitting there on my desk. This is awesome. This is such a vivid representation of a possible future. I wasn't even expecting it. I mean, all those other guys just sending me PowerPoints, I just assumed that's how the future is represented. I didn't think it could be represented as an actual object from the future. Tell me about this time machine. And you tell them, this is the way I go into these future worlds. I imagine deeply and richly into what could be in that world. I gather a bunch of people together, and I tell them about the time machine with the big red button and the knob with the repair tag on it, and we go there. And we use our imagination to try to feel into what these worlds could be like. Yeah, you know, it's all based on real research, but we're allowed to bring our imagination to it. This is what design fiction does. That old-fashioned futures report, the thing that is, it's a high-ticket item in the world where people are concerned about the future, the world where people are nervous about what kind of decision to make and what direction they should be going into and where the industry is going. It used to look like this. And now I'm saying it should look more like an artifact that came from the future. You can still have all the analysis. People want the Excel spreadsheets and all the graphs and that kind of stuff. But next to it should be artifacts that actually came from these worlds. So this was a project that we did, finished just a few months ago, where we had a very large autonomous vehicle company say, like, hey, we want to know a little bit more about what the autonomous vehicle future might be like. Could you guys do some future stuff? Okay, well, let's workshop this, figure out what we might want to do. All the while I'm thinking it's like, they're going to be like, this is crazy. He's going to tell me about the time machine. And we took these very serious, very well-positioned executive vice presidents of this and that into the time machine. And they loved it. The idea of actually traveling to these futures, finding the things around there, and being able to offer into the conversation the kinds of things that don't make it into those other reports. For example, in this particular magazine, so it's like, you guys know like the AAA, like the Automobile Association? This no? Oh, they don't? No one drives anymore? What's going on? Did I miss something? Am I in some future? So imagine a magazine. It's kind of like a trade magazine. Like it's sort of like an advocacy trade magazine that is there to support, advocate for, lobby for the benefits, rights, and attributions you want if you're a fan of autonomous vehicles. They send it out 4 times a year, different articles about, hey, best places to go if you got an autonomous vehicle, and here's a discount to go to Jay Leno's Museum of Manual Vehicles, where you too can try what it was like for your grandfather to do a K-turn. Try parallel parking. Ah, this sucks, this is the worst. Hill start, a manual transmission. So you start feeling into this world where we imagine that the things that we accept today that are hygiene, just normal, ordinary, have now evolved and changed. and the world feels a little bit differently. One of my favorite things in the magazine was, and this is how these things happen. So there's never a moment, because of the nature of the creative consciousness, where you're sort of not really feeling into kind of projects that are going on, or things that are sort of looming, or things that you're involved in. So I was going to Dunkin' Donuts. Do they have those out here? Dunkin' Donuts. And I was going to go because I had this routine where I go, before I take my dog to the park, I stop by and I get a small coffee. And they have the app now, so it's super easy. So you just like order the coffee, walk in and pick it up. And I was thinking, it's like, what is Dunkin' Donuts? What is this drive-through? What's going to be the drive-through in the autonomous vehicle future? And there was something about like the rhyming cadence of drive-through. My mind immediately went to drive to you. The Dunkin' Donuts drive to you. That's what it's going to be. They're going to be these kiosks about the size that could fit like 2 people that are just going to be whizzing around the streets, bringing people coffee. And there's something just like so like, of course, I see that I just had to make this little ad. You can kind of see it in the lower corner. It's an ad for like the Dunkin' Donuts drive to you, with all the language that you would have if you were an ad copy person creating this ad. And so you create this sort of representation. Now, in that conversation with that large autonomous vehicle company, they weren't saying like, hey, and we want you to do some of these drive-around kiosks. Sort of think that's going to be part of the future. It wasn't even part of the conversation we were having with them. It just sort of pops in and it creates this almost like production design for the world, as represented through this little, quarter-page ad. That the first time you go through the magazine, you're just going to miss it. You just kind of flip it through like, oh, okay, this is a nice article and this kind of thing. And then the next time you go through it, still don't see it. The third time you go through it, you're like, wait a minute, what's that? I hadn't expected that. This is another aspect of the future that I haven't really felt into. Now, is anyone going to make a hard and fast kind of, executive vice president decision about this kind of thing? My wager would be probably. They're going to look at that and be like, damn, that's a good idea. Hadn't thought about that. There's another ad in there for autonomous dumpsters. So I was sitting at Starbucks, and like a pickup truck comes, and it's got this kind of like jack lift where it goes, and it got the dumpster, and it picked the dumpster off, and it just went clanging away. I was like, where's that? Okay, the dumpster, I get that. Is that going to happen in the future? No, because someone is going to be like, you know what, we can save 12% on annual operating revenue if we get rid of the driver of that truck. As a matter of fact, if we get rid of the truck and we just put the locomotion on the dumpster. So now it's like you think it's like, okay, that's kind of cool. I get the business idea. But in the ad representation, that dumpster is in a bike lane, because that's going to happen. There are going to be dumpsters whizzing around, but banging up against sidewalks. And I'm not saying this is the world that I want, nor am I saying this is the world that won't happen, or I'm representing this as a dystopia. I'm saying this is the worlds that we live in. So I remember like the first time the Lime and Uber scooters showed up, there was no word about it. I was out on a morning bike ride, quite early in the morning, and there were just all these scooters. And I was like, what happened? How long was I asleep? And the world can change that quickly. And these are other things to kind of keep in mind. In this kind of representation, you can do a couple things. One thing is you can represent these kind of off-book ideas, the things that lie outside of where you expect structure wants to hear about. You can show all the extra elements, all the set dressing, all the stuff that in a show like Star Trek or in any movie or film, production design team is going to be just like in that world. There's a channel in my Discord where one guy, he's posting essentially, he's calling them design fiction artifacts as they appear in films, right? So he's looking at mostly the production design in films. And there's a film, you guys know Children of Men, came out, I don't know, maybe like 8 or 9 years ago. Amazing science fiction story about a world in which the human species can no longer reproduce. Okay, so common trope. And in that world, there's the main actor, the main character is meeting with his boss. And his boss is kind of like, his boss represents structure, everything about him. And his boss is sitting at his desk, and his boss takes a drink from a coffee mug and puts it down. You wouldn't notice it for a second. But this guy in my Discord zoomed in and looked at the mug and it's like, check out this mug. Look what's on it. Normally on that mug, you'd have your children. But this person had his parents. And it was just that little element, like someone in production design was like, no, there are no children. No one's going to have on their coffee mug the kind of print on demand of their kids. They're going to have their parents or a grandparent, someone who's no longer with them in this way. And it's that level of kind of care and detail and that level of attention to the constructing the world and building the world that design fiction allows you to do, even in these unexpected ways. And who knows? I mean, I'd like to think that on the set, like the production designer was just on this, no one even thought about it, no one represented it. The director wasn't like, zoom in on that because it helps fill out the world. It just appears. And it took Dre LeBray 12 years later to look at that and be like, check that out, you guys. Look at that. That's the world. Okay, so yeah, there's the dumpster ad. And then, the longer form stuff. So one of the things that came up in those workshops we were doing is, what are driver's licenses in this world? Is there something that's more like a non-driver license or an operator license? And would you need training to get that? And what kinds of bureaucracies are going to set up that allow people to either occupy or not occupy vehicles according to certain measures? Like, do you need to know how to execute the emergency stop? What do you do when there's no steering wheel? You need to be trained on how to perform and how to operate in the vehicle. What if you're like a kind of miscreant and you're constantly abusing the privileges you have to occupy these autonomous vehicles? Can you be prevented from occupying it? And if you can be prevented, what is the certification that makes sure that you are? So all these kinds of elements start popping up, and the kind of things that people need to hear about, but there are really no effective ways of representing it in such a way that someone sort of sees it and they're kind of like, okay, I feel the world you're talking about. I'm not just reading about it. I'm experiencing it in this other way. And it's the kind of thing that it was, as a magazine, like if you left it at the dentist's office on the table next to People magazine and whatever else, it forces someone to ask a question. Like they look at it, they might be like, okay, whatever, and they're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? They have that wait, what moment. And that wait, what moment is a crucial element. That's the point in which people are able to ask a question and engage in the material in this other way. Here's another example. So this is a project commissioned by the city of Geneva. It was another autonomous vehicle thing where they were like, hey, can you help us understand what the world might be like that we might need to be concerned about with autonomous vehicles? Sort of Geneva is kind of twisty, windy, sort of vaguely medieval city. What are the contingencies that we need to be aware of? We can't assume that every city or every place where autonomous vehicles be is like wide boulevards with clear lane markings and no blind turns and these kinds of things. So help us feel into that world. And again, a lot of these things are not necessarily predictions and they're not necessarily strict recommendations. They're more ways of helping people make decisions to feel into these worlds. Okay, so one of the things that Near Future Laboratory does is obviously we do design fiction, but we also have a vested interest and stake in disseminating this as a practice. And I say that not for extractive reasons, because I want you guys to buy the book. I say that because I think it is an existentially vital capability of us to reinvigorate, to activate our imaginations, and bring back that sense that we have of imagining into possible worlds. Because my feeling is that nowadays we're effectively living in someone else's dream about what the world should be like. We're living in someone else's dream about what the future contains for us. And the idea that when you ask someone about the future, they're going to give you the top 1, 2, or 3 things that Elon just said, or Sundar just said, or whoever else has got the loudest voice to describe to us the world that they want, should be a reminder that we're not actually occupying worlds that we want to live in. And my sense is that at some point, each of us, at some level, was told, stop screwing around, stop daydreaming. Effectively, we were told, stop imagining. Get on rails, figure out what you're going to do. Please don't tell me you want to be an artist. Please don't tell me you want to be a writer. Actor, what are you talking about? And we forget that ability, we forget that desire and interest and ambition to do something with our imagination, to activate our creative consciousness. And we forget that there's an ability to bring that creative consciousness to those other forms of structure, the things that maybe most of our parents hope that we would get involved in. There's a way to bring that kind of creativity, and the cross-pollination that you're describing that exists here is absolutely critical. So being able to be an engineer with a creative consciousness, being able to be an architect who can actually understands what it takes to materialize real change in the world while also holding on to that creative consciousness. All these things are absolutely vital skills that we're going to need to address some of the real critical existential challenges that the planet faces. That's what I got. Thank you.
Given that we just have one microphone, how about if people have questions they can ask, and maybe everyone can't hear, maybe you can just repeat a little bit the question. Is that okay to put that all on you?
Sure. A story?
More than you already did. I mean, it's amazing to me, maybe not a question, but I'll, okay.
When you made your cycling computer, essentially, to me it looked like it was more like an analog, or what we have now, more like an analog or whatever. It's just a simple round, like a gauge almost. And it's not, it doesn't appear digitized. I was thinking why it became so popular. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm incorrect, but when you're cycling or you're using your body or whatever, your arms and so forth, it's more of a smooth motion. And the gauge is like a smooth motion. Whereas a digitized gauge is like little segments. And is that one reason why it's so popular, or can you explain what your thought process was with that?
Yeah, sure. The way I look at Amida in this context, well, I mean, it was the main motivation, aside from wanting to actually feel what it's like to go through the shit show of starting a company and running it and all that kind of stuff, which was beautiful and excruciating at the same time, is that if I went to a future that was slightly adjacent to this world that we're in now, where the assumption is, oh, it's a digital thing, it's a computer, it must have a digital display. Like, that's the thoroughgoing assumption, and it should be square, right? Because that's how all the tooling has been set up, with the assumption that, you know, pixels are square, and so, well, why would we ever do something in a circle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you went to like just a world over here where that wasn't the case, where those expectations didn't quite exist, and where the assumption, if you start from the basic assumption and you just erase that and start with a new assumption, which is, I don't know, analog is beautiful, mechanical movements are somehow seductive. For me as a product guy, there's like really significant, beautiful engineering challenges to that. And every step of the way, someone's saying like, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, that's not available. Why would you ever want to do that? And I don't know, for me as a creative kind of product guy, it's like, awesome, let's do it. Let's figure out how to do it. And I think that's part of a particular kind of consciousness that is able to feel into other possible worlds, that is able to imagine so thoroughly that the world doesn't have to be the way it is, that it can just push through something, you know, like a, you know, fairly significant and difficult and heartbreaking and beautiful endeavor is like actually doing a company that's going to do something that is, everyone else is like, doesn't make any sense. You're crazy. For me, it's like I said, for me, anytime someone says that, I'm kind of like, that's my starter gun. I'm off.
Do you ever reach a point with those sort of projects where the resistance becomes overwhelming and you decide to walk away, or you just continue to persevere through the obstacle of people saying, why would you want to do it this way and you can't do it that way?
Yeah. If you had asked me that maybe like 3 years ago, I probably would have said something that would have been it would have been satisfying to me, which would have been along the lines of like, well, you know, sometimes it's just things, you know, you have a turning point or a decision is made or you run out of time or those kinds of things. Now my phrase is like, there's no off switch. I just kind of keep going. And I think, I wish that had come earlier in my professional life, because I think there were a lot of decisions that I don't regret them, I guess, in a way, but also I realized, I don't know, like I should have stayed on that. And I think that's a big part of the motivation now for this rally around design fiction, which was something that kind of, the notion of it was a series of conversations when I was teaching at USC that resulted in me doing an essay and kind of just turning it into a PDF and just putting it online, right? So that's as far as it went. And I really felt like that's it. I did it. I'm done with that. And then there was like another little nudge. So when I reached out to our mutual friends, John and Cezanne and Carl, and said like, hey, I want to do a workshop around this. think it would be fun to kind of get together. That there was another, you feel like a little bit more energy, because that was, as Carl and I were reflecting, that was me sending out an email to, I don't know, maybe 24 friends and colleagues saying, I'm going to be here in Detroit at this date and time. This is what we're going to do. It'd be great if you showed up. And people came on their own dime from around the world, including Bruce Sterling, science fiction writer. You know, they just showed up because they felt something. I didn't recognize that then. I just thought like, oh my God, I'm embarrassed. Oh. And when they showed up, you know, I had this little signal of like, okay, there's something there. And then it took another 2 years to actually publish the work from that in the form of TBD Catalog, which I consider like the first thoroughgoing design fiction project. So it's a catalog, a product catalog for the future, sort of along the lines of, you know, think of the crappiest product catalog that just shows up on your at your mailbox. The first thing, your first instinct is throw it out. And it's actually, I'm doing the 10th anniversary edition of it. So there'll be another for 10 years. Yeah. The gray hair, it's just a reminder. And at some point, I think, and I say this with complete humility, like starting a company, growing a brand, building it up, going through all kinds of, like my co-founder split as soon as, you know, we ran out of money, and I just kind of kept going because there was no off switch. And actually my brother, amazing kind of Buddha-like guy, who's like, I told him, I was like, I don't think this is gonna work. Like, this is what's going on, I'm out of money. And he just looked at me and was like, oh, you just wait. And I had no idea what he meant until 4 years later, I successfully sold the company. And I sold the company based on a piece of design fiction I did. So I stopped doing the PowerPoint decks, right? The 11-page PowerPoint deck that you send around to investors. And what I did is I created the annual report for the company from the future. So it was 2020, when was the pandemic? 2020, 2021? So around then, I basically spent most of the pandemic creating this annual report of the company from 2024. So I got in that janky time machine that smells of sweat and machine oil, and it's got the buttons with the tags and that kind of thing. I went to the future of the company and said, like, well, what would the company look like? What would it create? What would it be its products? And created a nearly 100-page annual report, complete with the letter from the CEO, the financials that are always at the back. And it was something that, doing that and having the company, having someone come along and say, like, this is beautiful, it's awesome, I want it. It sort of instilled in me this, like, you know, sort of humble confidence, like, this is a thing. This helps people feel into possible worlds. This way of kind of pulling in the creativity and the kind of vivid representations of the world is something that people seem to want and need. And building upon that and sort of having that sense of, like, why would you stop? Anything, you know, it could be assuming that it's not harming people or yourself. Why would you stop? If your creative consciousness is saying, hey, I feel this for you. This is an idea, there's something here. And then someone else comes along and says, like, I don't know, I think that's a silly idea. Whose dream are you living in? Are you living in your dream or their dream when they come and they try to undermine your idea or challenge your creative impulses? Now, it's different if someone comes along and says, like, that's amazing, that's beautiful. But have you thought about nudging it this way, where they're generative, where they're sort of like slowly kind of coming into your dream and they're sort of feel around, like, what is it that you see here? I can kind of see the same thing. Like, let me see how I can collaborate with you in this beautiful way. And even like if structure comes along and says, like, whoa, this is great. What do you need from me in order to realize this? And looking for that kind of response and remembering, like, this came from somewhere. This came from somewhere deep within inside me. It wasn't just some random thought, and question any impulse to dismiss it, any impulse to discard this beautiful thing that got sparked in your imagination as something that is irrelevant, or maybe it's not about it, not a good idea. Maybe I should just give up. Because sitting on the sofa and living in Elon's dream seems to be a lot easier than living in my own dream, constructing the world that I want to live in. So no, hasn't happened lately.
So in some classes, we are using and experimenting text-to-image AI generation outcomes. And I'm realizing that, like, you have imagination, you have a culture, you know things, and you manipulate them. So I'm curious, how do you accept, like, a good product
Yeah. I realize I haven't been repeating the questions. Okay. um, well, it's a really good question, and I think that I don't think there's any kind of instrumented way, right? I think a lot of this comes from, at least from me, from like an instinct. I could probably like maybe catalog what those elements of that instinctive response is in a way, but sometimes it's just like it goes back to me, the 8-year-old me. Whoa, cool! And that sometimes that's enough to kind of get started and get motivated enough to be like, I'm going to invest time, energy, money into this because I want that thing. I'll give you just a quick example of that in kind of in operation, completely unexpectedly, right? So you mentioned, image generation. So we're talking like Midjourney, DALL-E, these kinds of things. Okay, so yeah, so in the Discord, a bunch of us are deep into it at a bunch of different levels, from learning from each other to actually using it as an element of actual products that we're going to manufacture and sell as artifacts from the future, right? So there's one guy, we've collaborated in the past, we've known each other for, I don't know, since I moved to LA, so like almost 20 years. And he's been active in the Discord kind of quietly alongside, and I asked him, hey, Jed, have you played with Midjourney yet? And I sort of expected he'd be like, oh yeah, I've been messing around with it. Because he's a guy, he's got 2 3D printers at home, he's got one in the studio, he's got a laser cutter in the studio, like he's in this world, and he's done NFT projects. So my assumption was like, oh, he's been doing it, and I was just trying to, it was just a casual conversation. He's like, no, not really, not actually yet. And I was like, oh man, I just gotta try. And it was, the reason was I guess, it's like when you want a friend to also watch baseball with you or something, like, oh, it'll be fun to do it together. And so he asked me, like, hey, could you give me just a quick lesson? I said, well, here's a prompt that I've been using. I've been doing a lot of automobiles or vehicles of some description. Here's a prompt I've been using. I gave it to him sort of like Mad Lib style. Like, you kind of get what's going on here. Just talk to the robot this way. Okay, maybe I'll give it a whirl. And the next day he came back. One of his muses as an artist, he's a exceptional drawing, a lot of hand-done work. He'll do stuff with material like laser cutting things, but one of his muses happens to be hooved animals, like sheep and cows. Like they just show up in his work in these different ways. And so what he came back was like this, essentially like a flock of kind of like cybernetic sheep in a way, and it was just kind of like, whoa, that's kind of, yeah, okay, this is cool. Like I would have, this feels something. I felt something. I felt that whoa, cool. And my first whoa, cool is like, since he's into collecting systems, like with the NFT thing, I was like, oh, why don't we do this as a set of trading cards? And I was into, I want material goods. I don't want just digital things. It was like, let's figure out the tooling to do actual collectible trading cards. I'll call some people and we'll figure it out, and that'll be cool. We'll do collector's editions of these cards. We'll make maybe 100 packs, and it'll just be a fun, wacky thing that we'll do together. And he's like, okay, cool, that'd be great. And so he happened to, in the intervening, we were walking around talking about a bunch, he happened to share the sheep with his stepdad. And his stepdad's a big PK Dick fan. And his stepdad was like, you know that this guy wrote this book about electric sheep. It's called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And he shared back a cover of the book from one of the first edition mass market paperbacks. And when I saw the cover of that book, like that whoa, cool went someplace, and I was like, okay, we're gonna do a book along with the trading cards. And the book, without me really knowing it, was essentially asking ChatGPT to do an interpretation of the Android psyche as through the Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? So all of a sudden it was like all these elements, and there's a certain level of like, through this exercise, like there was always that level of, in my mind, because there's that whoa, cool feeling here, and because you're making decisions based on that, this is going to be a thing. This will be amazing. It'll be something that other people will feel into, because I think other people get that whoa, cool feeling. And for me, it was like, I want to do trading cards, and Jed wants to do sheep, and I've figured out like really efficient. I figured out efficient tooling for for printing. We do books. Like all these things were coming together in this one beautiful way. So that for me is the whoa cool feeling. That's the measure.
So maybe one last question before the building collapses. I mean, you are a storyteller. You tell amazing stories, and I'm thinking about the technical guide from Star Trek, right, which is such an amazing thing. But to talk about the communicator and then to know that you worked at Nokia was like written for you. But it probably always wasn't that clear, right? And so sitting amongst a group of students who don't yet maybe have your story is amazing, but you're also kind of telling it retroactively, crafted it, and now these perfect processes sort of along the way. How would you help coach our students to think about finding that direction, or where might those key moments be? Like what would have happened if you weren't 8 years old at the Star Trek convention, right? And then maybe many of us feel like, oh, our story is not quite making sense yet. Those things haven't quite aligned. Is that something that you would work on to be able to craft the story, or it's just that?
No, it's not easy. Well, if I think about the story that I told you here today, well, I'll tell you how it came about. I was asked to give a keynote at the AIGA conference. I think you shared the video from that, right?
Some of the students were watching that.
Okay, so someone, a great guy, asked me. He's got his website is morematter.com, I think. It's a design. He's got a little design studio and shop in Denver, right? And so out of the blue, he asked me, he's like, hey man, I've been following your work. I really think it's interesting. I'm responsible for organizing this year's convention. Would you do a keynote? And so I was like, yeah, sounds great. I like you. I like what you've done. So yeah, it'd be cool to do that. And then that was it. And so the way I do prepare for these things basically is I don't prepare. And part of that is I'm just not. I should prepare better, right? And so it was in Seattle. I get to Seattle, whatever, and I go, and they said there's a rehearsal. I think it was the day before. Yeah, it might have been the day before, something like that. Could you? And I was like, rehearsal. It's like, I'm like a rock star. I just go up on stage and I just perform. You get what you get, right? So I was like, all right, I'll go to the rehearsal. I'm not a rock star. I'll go to the rehearsal, and I go into this room. And this room was fucking huge. It was row after row after row. And there's like, I can hear someone like on a walkie, like, camera 4, can you just pull in a little bit closer? Like, I'm like, oh my God, there's a production team. I go backstage, and it's like being backstage at a Rolling Stones concert. They're like hard shell cases. There are people walking around like this. There are a bunch of text at big displays. And I was like, God damn, this is gonna be hard. I gotta get my game on point. And so when that happened, I was like, yeah, rehearsal, they said, this is what we're gonna do, and this is how it's gonna happen, and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, cool. And then I just kind of, there was things I was gonna do that day, and I was like, I'm going back to my room. I'm gonna get this thing on lock. And so this is the first time I've done this. It was like, I was like, I need a story to tell. I can't just do the old deck. And so I sat down, and I essentially, what I've shared here in structure, if not precisely the same thing, was what I sat there and I constructed. And it wasn't until I started doing that at that moment, and with that level of kind of care and attention, that I remembered that story. Like, it was always an element, and the Star Trek stuff appears in like the essay I wrote a long time ago, but I didn't construct it in that way. It was just kind of like, here's something that I think has something to do with what I'm talking about. And it wasn't until I could tell a story more like the experiences that I had, that, in reflection, that led me to that I figured out. So that was like just a few months ago. It was like, I mean, I knew my dad took me to the convention, and all that kind of stuff, but I couldn't find the way to sort of tap into that. I guess to the question you're asking, it's like, well, why? And it was also a reflection. So after I did that talk, and the response from people was very generous. Like, even backstage, there were people who I probably should have known, like really eminent designers. They were like, oh my God, that's amazing. And one of them came to me. She's a partner at Pentagram, right? And she's done all the titles for Saturday Night Live. So this is someone that's like, you know, oh, hi, nice to meet you. You know, but I should have been like, oh my God, that's amazing. You got an amazing career. Can I visit your studio? This kind of stuff was telling me her own Star Trek stories. She's like, my husband over there, who's another eminent designer, he's like, yeah, he had a Star Trek uniform. I was like, oh yeah, I had one when I was a kid. She was like, no, now he has one as an adult. And you just kind of it kind of opened up the conversation in this really beautiful way to where again, it was almost like a nudge of confidence, like, okay, there's something here. I'm not saying that in a prideful way. I'm saying like there's some element of this story that people are able to feel into at some level. And I don't think they're doing it necessarily because of, precisely my experience. It's like they're also feeling into it in these adjacent ways, whether it's a Star Trek thing or whether it's like the allegory between imagination and structure. People are like, yeah, that helps me understand my relationship to the rest of the world and why, in my experience of being a creative, I feel conflicted, or the things I have to deal with, or the reasons why I sigh so much, whatever it might be, or the reasons why I feel like I feel a sense of doubt or confusion when it seems like someone's telling me to do something else or different. I didn't know any of that stuff. It wasn't until I could articulate it in this way, and then it felt so urgent that I remember I was coming back from, so that was like in October or November, the AIGA thing. I was coming back from visiting family like in January, I think. I remember like, my brother, he's a writer, and he was telling me, just matter of fact, he's like, oh, I'm gonna go use a friend's house at the shore to do a writing retreat. And I was like, wow, that sounds amazing. And the flight back, it just stuck with me. I just turned to my wife and I said, like, I'm gonna go on a writing retreat. I think I'm gonna go Thursday. And because it felt so urgent to essentially craft this into what's the follow-on book to the Manual of Design Fiction, because the Manual of Design Fiction never got into that, what I felt was like the core elements. It was like how, but it wasn't like, well, why? Why would we do this? And the answer was there in that idea of like, if we can have imagination and structure in real close harmony and collaboration, so that we're not, you go and you get the amazing job at Apple or Google or Amazon or whatever, and as soon as you get in there, you're like, oh, this isn't what I thought. Figma all day, is that where my creativity goes? Or contending with all those other elements that happen in and around those kinds of organizations? And so I think that there's an opportunity now. I feel like there's an opportunity to have these kinds of conversations, to make it plain, like speak about it openly, in a huge kind of like, like almost like the Coachella of imagination and structure, like a big thing that rallies people around this question, not to say like, we're gonna take the world back, but it's like, we're gonna rebuild the world. And we're gonna do it with our imaginations, and we're gonna do it with all the amazing, remarkable material making practices that exist in Google and Amazon and Apple and Facebook. We're gonna collaborate in a way to change the world. And that's what I felt would need to be said. That's what I have to say about that. Thank you.